Masechet Shevuot, Daf Daled. We are continuing to analyze the very first Mishnah in the Perek that listed 4 areas of halacha where there are 2 aspects of a law that are more or less explicit in the Torah, and another 2 aspects of that same law that we derive from them. And the Gemara wondered, who is the author of this Mishnah? It seems it cannot be Rabbi Ishmael, because Rabbi Ishmael would not agree with the first one, Shevuot Shetayim Shehen Arba. The 2 types of Shevuot for which one is liable to Korban Ole V'Yored is Lehara or Lehetiv. If someone makes a vow about the future, I will eat tomorrow, or I won't eat tomorrow, and then violates it, so he has to bring a Korban Ole V'Yored. Everybody agrees with that. That's the 2 explicit ones Rabbi Ishmael agrees. However, the Shehen Arba that we will derive also in the past, I ate yesterday, I did not eat yesterday. Rabbi Ishmael does not think that one is liable to a Korban Ole V'Yored. In that case, even if it's prohibited, it's not a Korban when one does it by mistake. And therefore, Rabbi Ishmael cannot be the author, because he would disagree with the Shehen Arba here. So then maybe it's Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva does agree with this clause, but Rabbi Akiva does not agree with the next one, Yediota Tumah Shetayim Shehen Arba. The basic 2 types of unawareness regarding Tumah is if I knew I was Tameh, then I forgot I was Tameh, and I went into the Bet HaMikdash or ate Kodashim, and then remembered again, then that's also Korban Ole V'Yored. That's two laws, going into the Bet HaMikdash and eating a Korban. Now, Shehen Arba would include that I remembered that I was Tameh the whole time, but I forgot that this meat was sacrificial meat, or I forgot that this area that I'm walking in is part of the Temple Mount, and then I walk there by mistake, so that would be a Korban Ole V'Yored according to the Mishnah. However, Rabbi Akiva does not agree. Rabbi Akiva thinks one brings a Korban Ole V'Yored only if the forgetfulness was about me, my status, and I forgot I was Tameh, I thought I was Tahor. But one does not bring Korban Ole V'Yored if the forgetfulness is regarding the Mikdash or the meat. And so therefore, each clause cannot be, neither Rabbi Akiva nor Rabbi Ishmael agree with this clause and that clause, so we wondered who is the author of the Mishnah. And we landed on an answer that we return to now. We can explain the entire Mishnah that it's the opinion of Rabbi Ishmael, and when it says there are 2 that are 4, it's actually not talking about when one does it by mistake and then has to bring Korban Ole V'Yored, but rather when one makes a false vow on purpose. And in that case, he would get lashes. And that's true in all 4 cases, according to Rabbi Ishmael. Regarding the ones of the past that I ate or didn't eat, in that case, one gets malkot because we compared Shevuot Bitui to Shevuot Shav. Just avoid, if you say the sky is green, one gets lashes, and so we compare the 2. And regarding the future, if I say, I will not eat, and then I eat, that's a lav sheyesh bo ma'aseh, so certainly you get lashes. And we just said that, according to Rabbi Ishmael, even a lav she'en bo ma'aseh, one gets lashes, and that would account for the other case where I say, I will eat, and I don't. Although I'm being passive, I get lashes for that. And so we explained that line according to Rabbi Ishmael, and that way, both the first 2, this could be Rabbi Ishmael, and Yediot HaTumah is Rabbi Ishmael, and so we seem to be okay. But now the next question is, what about Shabbat and Negaim? If this one is talking about lashes, Shevuot, Shetayim Shehen Arba, is because of lashes, then it makes sense that the other cases in the Mishnah should also be about lashes when someone does it on purpose. So that's what we have to check now. Marot negaim, my malkot ika. When would you get lashes because of something that has to do with a sarat, a spot? And the answer is bekoses baharto. If someone cuts off the leprous mark, a bahedet, you're not allowed to cut it off. You have to leave it there, check it out, show it to the kohen, wait the time, and go through the process. You're not allowed to just cut it off. How do we know that? We follow the methodology of Rabbi Abin, who says anytime in the Torah says the words hishamer, or the word pen, or the word al, that means, indicates that that verse is teaching us a negative commandment. And we have here Hishamer benega hasaraat lishmor meod is be careful regarding a leprous mark and be careful with it very much. So hishamer, be careful what? To do what? So it must be a lotas, even though hishamer, be careful, watch out. So that is teaching us, do not cut it off, because then you're not being careful with it. And therefore, that would be the law of the leprous mark, and the two that are four different shades of white and their derivatives. So that is that's we can explain the negaim of all four cases that will require lashes. Good. Yitziot Shabbat, my malkot ika. Let's go on to Shabbat. If someone carries on Shabbat, are there lashes? Lav shenitan lazharat mitat betin hu v'kol lav shenitan lazharat mitat betin and lokin alav. The violating Shabbat is a negative commandment which is subject to the warning or the prohibition of mitah, of a betin. You get capital punishment in a court, a human court, for violating Shabbat if one does it on purpose, with a warning and with witnesses. And there is a general rule that anytime you have a lo taseh for which one could be liable to capital punishment, you don't get lashes, even if you don't end up getting capital punishment because you get off on the technicality. Maybe there was no warning or something like that. So, okay, you don't get capital punishment, but then you don't get lashes instead of that. So in what case would one get lashes for violating Shabbat? And the answer is Mishum hachi ka mokminan kedebi Ishmael damar lav shenitan lazarat mitat betin lokin alav. Oh, actually, this is the entire reason that we decided that the Mishnah follows the opinion of Rabbi Ishmael in the first place, because Rabbi Ishmael thinks that a lo ta'aseh, even though if you did it with all the requirements on purpose, with witnesses, and with a warning, one would get the death penalty. But if for some reason you don't get the death penalty, then Rabbi Ishmael thinks you do get lashes. And so therefore, we followed Rabbi Ishmael, and we went through this whole exercise to show that this Mishnah is the opinion of Rabbi Ishmael precisely for this very reason, because he would be able to solve the Shabbat case, because he thinks even though it gets capital punishment, it also can be liable for lashes. All right, good. So now we're so far so good. We explained the Mishnah according to the Ishmael. But now we wonder, Halav hachi kaima kerebi Akiva? Are you telling me if not for this fact, then you would say that the Mishnah is somehow the opinion of Rabbi Akiva? Kashya yidiot. But then we would have a problem of the yidiot hatuma, where Rabbi Akiva says only two of them and not the other four. So what do you mean mishum hachi? This is why we're following Rabbi Ishmael. No, you're following Rabbi Ishmael because of yidiot follows Rabbi Ishmael, and Rabbi Akiva has a problem with the Yidiot one. He says two and not two that are four. Lava Amat Rabbi Ishmael he ul malkut, Rabbi Akiva name ul malkut. Wait a second, we answered that already for Rabbi Ishmael, because we said that we're talking about doing it on purpose and one would get lashes. And indeed, if one enters into the Bet HaMikdash on purpose and with a warning and so on, then one would get lashes. And similarly, if someone who is tameh eats food that's korban, then on purpose, they get lashes. Since we interpreted this case and all of the cases in the Mishnah that it has to do with violating on purpose and getting lashes and not violating by mistake, and which would be korban ole v'yored, because we couldn't explain the whole Mishnah that way according to Rabbi Ishmael either. So since we're doing that any case, saying that the Mishnah is applying to lashes, we could say that same answer for Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva nameh ul malkot. So why not say the entire Mishnah is the opinion of Rabbi Akiva and it's all regarding lashes, and that would solve the Yidiot HaTumah case for Rabbi Akiva. All right, good question. We answer, if so, the language of the Mishnah says Yidiot HaTumah, that indicates Yidi'ah, has to do with not knowing and knowing, that you knew that you were Tameh and then you didn't know, and then you knew again. That's why it has to do with Yidiot, which would only be that it's by mistake. If it was on purpose, then it should say Hatraot, forewarning, because in order to give lashes, you have to get a warning. It's not about knowing. The main thing is, did you get a warning? And then you did it anyway, knowing so, b'mezid. So it should have said hatraot. So we answer, halakashya teneh, yidiot hatraot. That's not a problem. It's just we could add a word into the Mishnah and either actually add the word or say this is what it means. It means yidiot, knowledge of forewarning, that you knew because you got forewarned. That's how you know that it was prohibited, and then you did it b'mezid. It doesn't necessarily mean yidiot that it had to be he'alem, that you didn't know. So we could explain the wording of the Mishnah, okay, in that way. Wait a second, but you're still going to have a problem because we said two that are four. But if you say it's on purpose, then it's only two. You see, when we said two that are four, let's take going into the Mikdash. There's two ways I can violate that by mistake. Either I know this is the Bet HaMikdash, but I forgot that I was tameh. Or I know I'm tameh, but I forgot that this area is the Bet HaMikdash. So you have two ways of violating that. And the same is true for the meat. I know I forgot that I'm tameh, even though I knew that this is sacrificial meat. Or I knew I was tameh, but I forgot that this is sacrificial meat. So in each case, you have one and another one and another one, so you could have four. But if you say it's about doing it on purpose, well then there's only two ways to violate on purpose, one in each case. Either if it's on purpose, it means I know I'm tameh and I know that this flesh is sacrificial meat and I do it anyway. Or I know I'm tameh and I know that this is the area of the Bet HaMikdash and I do it anyway. So it has to be, in order to violate b'mezid, to get lashes, I would have to know both aspects of the violation of the law. So there's only two laws here, not four. And so there's no way to say two that are four. So we cannot fit that in. Vetu et sheyesh ba yedi'ah b'techila v'yedi'ah b'sof ve'elim b'intayim ha'alama l'malkot ma'ya b'deteh vetu hareh zeh be'olev yored. And furthermore, the continuation of the Mishnah makes it totally impossible to explain this way, because the continuation says, regarding Yidiota Tuma, only if he has Yidia B'techila V'Yidia B'sof, Elim B'ntayim, Hareh Zeh Be'olev Yored. Has to be a case where you knew and then forgot and then you knew. And you get a Korban Olev Yored. Well, if he's talking about B'mezid, well then there was no forgetfulness and it wouldn't be Olev Yored. So the continuation of the Mishnah is clearly assuming that this case here, Yidiota Tuma, is in fact talking about doing it by mistake and nothing to do with lashes. So now we are back to the drawing board and we have a major problem. How are we going to explain this Mishnah? And this question is not only if you say it's Rabbi Akiva, it's also a problem if you say it's Rabbi Ishmael, because Rabbi Ishmael also, we said, he's explaining all four cases as talking about lashes. But if the second case, Yidiota Tuma, is talking about lashes, then there's only two cases, all the same questions that we just mentioned would be a problem for Rabbi Ishmael too. And therefore we have to go back to the drawing board and say, who is the author of this Mishnah? The first line doesn't fit well with Rabbi Ishmael. The second line doesn't fit well with Rabbi Akiva. So we come up with a new answer. Ela amar Rav Yosef, Rabbihi, v'naseb la liba de Tanae, b'diot naseb la kerebi Ishmael, b'shvot nasib la kerebi Akiva. Rav Yosef explains that the author of the Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. And he mentioned two different clauses, although each one is according to a different Tana. When it came to Yidiot Tuma, so he included the law according to Rabbi Ishmael. He agrees with that law. And when it came to Shevuot, he formulated the law according to Rabbi Akiva, and he put contradictory things. Rabbi Yehuda himself, he wanted to bring a collection of all the things that are two, that are four, according to all the opinions, and they're not reconcilable. There's two that he followed, two different opinions in formulating the Mishnah. The Mishnah is more of an anthology of multiple opinions, and it doesn't all follow one opinion. That is Rav Yosef's answer. We are going to return to this answer at the end, so remember it, even though we're going to try out something slightly different right now. Amar Rav Asher, Amrita d'shma'ata kamer de Rav Kahana, v'amar li la temar bi nasiba liba de Tanae, ve'le la sibira le. Rav Asher said, I repeated what Rav Yosef said in front of Rav Kahana. And Rav Kahana said, no, don't say that. Don't say that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, he formulated according to two different Tanaim, and Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, he doesn't agree with both of them. He just puts in the Mishnah an anthology, and he agreed with one or agreed with the other. I don't know, we're not sure what he actually thought himself, but he didn't agree with both of them because these are from two different opinions. He just wanted to put together an anthology of both opinions. No, don't say that. Ela, Rabbi Tamed Nafish Tenafshe Mefaresh. Rather, Rabbi is in fact saying his own opinion. It happens to be he agreed with Rabbi Akiba on one law, and he agreed with Rabbi Ishmael regarding the other law. And so he wrote what he actually thinks. So he wrote what he agrees with. Rabbi Ishmael, I think he's right here, so I put that law. And I think Rabbi Akiba is right, so in that law, so I put the other one in. And that's even better. Don't say that this is an anthology, that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is just putting different opinions that are contradictory, and he doesn't agree with all the opinions. No, say that he picked the one that he thinks is halacha, and therefore that's nicer, because we could say the Mishnah is in fact a code of law according to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, even though he picks sometimes the opinion of one and sometimes the opinion of the other. Every posek does that. They don't always follow only one opinion. Ditanya, minayin she'eno chayav ela al sheyesh b'yidi'ah b'techila v'di'ah b'sof v'helem b'ntayim tamud omar v'ne'aylam v'ne'alam shednei pe'amim divrei Rabbi Akiba Rabbi Omer. So we're going to see in this baraita that there is two opinions about Yediot HaTumah, one by Rabbi Akiba, and the next one is going to be by Rabbi. Even though it's unusual that Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi are going to be arguing because they're different generations. But this Baraita does have both of these opinions, and we're going to show that Rabbi is following not Rabbi Akiva, and therefore is following Rabbi Ishmael. So here's where they learn it. So how do you know that one is not liable to bring a korban oleh v'yored unless there was knowledge at the beginning, and then one forgot, and then there's knowledge again? Because the pasuk in this regard says ne'alam twice. We can see the pasukim right over here. It says on nefesh b'chol davar tameh or b'dimlat chayav tameh v'ashes tameh v'ne'alam imenu v'hu tameh v'ashem. So law have to do with tumah and v'ne'alam. He didn't know, and then it continues. O ki yiga b'tumat adam l'chol tumat hashid ma'ba v'ne'alam imenu v'hu yada v'ashem. The hu v'yada is going to come up in a second in the Biz Darasha. But Rabbi Akiva is noticing that it says ne'alam twice. So why does it say ne'alam twice? It must mean that, you forgot. So let's see. When did you forget? You forgot means that you forgot while you were making the sin. Okay, so you did it by mistake at that point. Now, eventually, you must have remembered because you're bringing a korban olev yored. If you never remembered the whole time, well, that would be the, what we said before, the Yom Kippur korban. So certainly he forgot at the time that he did it, and then he remembered and brought a korban. That's one ne'alam. But how about, why do I need the second ne'alam? It must be the second ne'alam is teaching me that I must have known beforehand and forgotten. So from these two instances of ne'alam, and one of them is extra, we learn that I knew before, then I forgot, and then I knew again. Okay, so that's Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Omer and Osarich. Rabbi says, listen, I agree with the law that you have to have knowledge and then forgetfulness and then knowledge again, meaning I knew I was tameh, and then I forgot I was tameh, and I ate the sacrificial food, and then I remembered I was tameh. But I don't agree with the way you derived it. I don't need this derivation of ne'alam twice. I can derive it in a different way. Harehu omer ne'alam mikelal diyada. So if it had only one ne'alam, it means I forgot. If you say I forgot, that means you knew before. You can't say, oh, I forgot that fact. If I say I forgot that fact, that means I knew it. It's different from I never knew, which would mean you never knew. But if you say ne'alam, means I knew already. So from that one word, I could learn that he knew and then forgot and committed the sin. And then he remembered again. So from that, v'ne'elam v'hu yada, I already learned the law that Rabbi Akiva had of I knew, forgot, and then knew. So what's the second v'ne'elam coming to teach? Must be something else. It comes to add the two that are four. To teach me, not only am I liable to a korban olev yored when I forgot that I was tameh, also when I forgot that this is sacrificial food, or that this area that I'm walking is the mikdash. And so we have the second Ne'elam to teach that. Rabbi Akiva does not use that. Rabbi Akiva uses the second Ne'elam to teach the basic law. So we see that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is in fact going against Rabbi Akiva and following Rabbi Ishmael when it comes to Yediot HaTumah. So we're good so far that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi agrees with Rabbi Akiva in that clause. Ashkechan b'Yediot itle ta'ameh denafsheh. Shevuot elet le ta'ameh denafsheh minalan sebarahu. So we find that regarding Yediot HaTumah, we know what Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi's own opinion is, and that he follows Rabbi Ishmael. So far so good. But when it comes to Shevuot, we don't have any source for proving what Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi himself said, that he follows Rabbi Akiva. We don't have such a source. We answer, Sivarahu. It's based on logical reason. We're going to compare it to something else. Lishanachalina, another version of this that says basically the same thing. Ashkechan b'Yediot HaTumah sabar like Rabbi Ishmael. We find regarding Yediot HaTumah that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi agrees with Rabbi Ishmael. It's an explicit source. B'Shevuot sabar like Rabbi Akiva minalan sebarahu. But regarding Shevuot, do we ever find a source that says he agrees with Rabbi Akiva? We don't find it. So instead we say it's based on a logical reasoning by a comparison that we are about to see.
רבי עקיבא, מה טעמה כמחייב לשעבר? דדריש ריבויה ומיעוטה, רבי נמה דריש ריבויה ומיעוטה. From where does Rabbi Akiva derive that regarding Shevuot Bitui, one is liable to bring a korban oleh v'yored, not only for the future, which lehara or lehatib is what the Torah says, but also for the past, and therefore that line in the Mishnah fits with Rabbi Akiva. How does he derive it? From Ribui and Mi'ut, which I'll show you in a second. And Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, he also uses Ribui and Mi'ut regarding a different issue that we see in the following Baraita. And that's how we know. Although it's not explicit, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, we don't have a source of what he says about Shevuot. However, since he uses the methodology of Ribui Mi'ut in one place, which stands to reason, Sevara, that he uses the methodology of Ribu Mi'ut here in Shevuot, and that's how Rabbi Akiva himself derives this law. So let's look at how Rabbi Akiva derives this law. This is found later on Daf Chaf Vav, where says, Mai Rabbi Akiva dedarish ribuye u'mi'uteh. So where do we see Rabbi Akiva derives things from Ribuye Mi'ut? And it quotes this example, and we have the pasuk here where he derives it from. The pasuk says, "O nefesh ki tishaba lebate bisfatayim." So to make someone who makes a vow, that sounds like any vow that he says with his lips. But then it says a specific type, lehara o lehetiv. So first we had a klal, and then this is a pirat, and then it's a lechol asher yivateh adam bishvuah. Anything that a person says in a vow. So we have a generality, and then a specific, lara lativ, and then a generality again. And therefore, Rabbi Akiva is going to learn as follows: O nefesh ki teshaba riba, lara lativ mi'et, l'chol asher yibateh adam, chazav riba, riba mi'et v'riba, riba hakol, my riba kol mileh, u'may mi'et devar mitzvah. The way ribui mi'ut works is that if you have a ribui mi'ut and ribui, then you actually include everything. And in that case, why is there a mi'ut if you're including everything? So the mi'ut is always going to exclude just one thing. In this case, something has to do with the mitzvah. But otherwise, everything is included, past and future. That is as opposed to the Ishmael. He uses a different methodology of kilal uprat, using the same words. O nefesh ki teshaba lebate b'sfatam kilal, lara lativ pirat, l'chol asher yibateh adam chazar v'kalal, kilal uprat uchlal, e'at hadan ela ke'ayin hapirat. When you have a klal, uprat, uklal, even though it's the same setup of words as ribui, mi'ut, and ribui, but the way you derive something from it is different. What you do in that case is you say, well, let me see what the specific is, and I conceptualize it. Anything that is similar to the specific example also will be included. Not everything, not just one thing, not the whole klal, not just the pirat, but anything that is similar to the pirat in some way. And just like in this case, the pirat, lehara o lehativ, is something
that is going to be future-oriented. Therefore, only things that are future-oriented, not avad. So that's what we said. Rabbi Yishmael cannot be the author of that line in the Mishnah. But Rabbi Akiva, because he uses Ribui and Mi'ut, can be the author of that Mishnah. So that's how we established so far that Rabbi Akiva derives this law regarding Shevuot, future and past, using Ribui and Mi'ut. Now, if Rabbi Yehuda Nasi also follows the methodology of Ribui and Mi'ut, then that would be the indication that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi agrees with Rabbi Akiva on this law. And we see that in this case, the Tanya Rabbi Omer, Bakol podin bechor adam, chutz min hashetarot, v'Rabbanan amre, Bakol podin bechor adam, chutz me'avadim ushtarot ve'karkaot. When someone has a firstborn son and all the other conditions are fulfilled, he has to redeem the firstborn by giving 5 coins to a kohen. Now, you don't have to use coins. You can use anything that has has the same value as those 5 silver coins. And so there's 2 opinions. You can't use everything, only some things. So the Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says you can use anything in order to redeem a firstborn human, except for promissory notes. You can't say here's an IOU. No, you can use you could use fruit, you could use bottles, whatever you want to use. Money, of course, you can use, but you can't use an IOU. However, the rabbis say you can use anything to redeem a human being that's a bechor, except for avadim. You can't say, here, I'll give you the coin, I'll pay you with these 3 slaves here that are worth that amount. And you cannot do that. You cannot use IOUs either, a promissory note. You also cannot use land. So that's the machloket between them. My ta'amad Rabbi, what's the source for Rabbi? Darish ribuyeu me'oteh, uftuyam ben chodesh riba, be'erkecha kesef 5 shekalim mi'et, tifteh chazar v'riba. It's from this pasuk here, where it says, uftuyam ben chodesh, all right, its redemption will be when it's one month old. That's a generality. It sounds like uftuyav. You can do it in any way. And then it says the word tifteh, which is another generality. And then it says, but it has to be 5 silver coins. So from this phrase alone, I would assume that means 5 silver coins. And so here you have 2 words for generality, uftuyav and tifteh, but then one phrase of a limitation. Now, this is a strange case, not unusual, because it's not a generality and then a limitation and then the generality. It's actually 2 generalities and then a specific. So it doesn't fit into the normal structure. Nevertheless, Rabbi Yehuda uses it and considers it a ribui, mi'ut, and ribui, even though it's out of order. Uftiam ben chodesh, that's here at the beginning of the pasuk, and then he jumps to erkecha kesef shekalim, and then he goes backwards to find the tifteh. Nevertheless, he calls it riba umi'et v'riba, riba hakol. My riba, kol mile umay mi'et shetarot. Since it does have this structure, so we use ribui mi'ut, which includes everything, but the specific comes to exclude one thing. What one thing will it exclude? It'll exclude promissory notes, but only promissory notes, avadim and karkaot, those are okay. But the other rabbis who disagree, they use kelal uprat, like Rabbi Yishmael does. Uftu yab mi ben chodesh kelal, berkecha kesef 5 shekalim perat, tifteh chazar vekalal. He uses the same exact phrases, and again, even though they're out of order, to say kelal uferat uchelal, e'atadan ela ka'ena perat. Ma perat meforash davar mitaltel v'gufo mamon, af kol davar mitaltel v'gufo mamon. So when we have a kelal uprat ukelal, we're going to include only things that are similar to the example in some conceptual way. So just like the example is, which is coins, is something that is movable and is itself valuable. So too it has to be something movable and is itself valuable. Yasu karkaot she'enam mitaltelin, that will exclude land, because you can't move land. Yasu avadim shukshur lekarkaot, that excludes slaves, because even though slaves technically are movable, you can pick one up and move it, but they are compared to karkaot for many different laws. And that excludes promissory notes because they are movable, but they don't have intrinsic value like coins do or like some goods would. And that's why we exclude all of them. And therefore we see that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, he's the one that says we follow Ribui and Mi'ut here. If he does so here, then it makes sense that he would use the same methodology in other places, including regarding Shevuot, where he would agree then with Rabbi Akiva's derivation that one is liable for Korban Olev Yored, not only for future, but also past vows. And now we have a good answer. Who is the author of the Mishnah? It's Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, and he actually agrees with all the parts of it, as Rav Kahana in fact said. Rav Kahana said, no, don't say that he's just quoting an anthology, but rather Rabbi is quoting his own opinion, and we just saw sources that indicate that in fact Rabbi Yehuda Nasi agrees with Rabbi Ishmael in one case and with Rabbi Akiva in the other case. Amar le Ravina le Amemar Rabbi Darish Ribuye u'mi'ute v'harbi kelale u'firate Darish Ravina es Amemar. Is that true what we just explained above? That Rabbi generally uses the methodology of Ribuy and Mi'ut? But that's not true. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi uses kelal u'prat. Where do we see that? In the following Baraita, Detanya, Marseya, en li ela Marseya minayin l'rabot hasol v'hasira v'hamachat v'hamakdeyach v'hamachteb, Tamud omar v'lakachta, kol davar shenilkach bayad, divrei Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda. The question is regarding this pasuk here, that if an Eved Ivri worked for 6 years, and at the end he wants to stay with his master, so then you have to make a hole in his ear, and it says v'lakachta tamarseya, you take an awl. If you just had that word, I would assume it has to be an awl. You can't use anything else. And you put it through his door. You put it through his ear lobe at the door. So let's go back. And so now we know that the awl you can use, but maybe it means only an awl. How do you know that you can also use the thorn from a palm, a thorn, a needle, a gimlet, a stylus, other kinds of needles and pins? How about any of those things? Can you use them? Talmud Omar, and that's why the pasuk says velakachta. That's the beginning of the pasuk, the first word, velakachta and marseya. So since it has velakachta, which is a generality, even though it says marseya, which is a particular, so he says, well, you know what? Since it says to take anything that you can take, anything that's a movable item that is can make a hole, you can use. That's according to Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Omer marseya ma marseya miuchad shel matechet avkol shel matechet. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. Yehuda Hanasi says you can just like an awl is made out of metal, you can use anything made out of metal. So you could use a pin or something made out of metal, but not if it's something that's made out of a thorny bush or anything like that. What's the source of their controversy? Rabbi Darish kelale ufirate. Rabbi is saying kelalu prat. And so you have a kelalu prat here, so you can take things that are similar conceptually in some way to an awl. Well, it's made out of metal, so all things that are made out of metal. Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda Darish Ribuy u'mi'ut. Whereas Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda, he's using Ribuy and Mi'ut, and in that way he's saying, well, to take, so you can take anything. And here we see that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is saying Kalal u'perat, not Ribuy and Mi'ut. And that disputes what we just said before, that he uses Ribuy and Mi'ut and is therefore like Rabbi Akiva. And we answer in Ba'alma kelale ufrate darish. Indeed, in general, if you find a general example of klal uprat uklal, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is going to use kelal uprat against Rabbi Akiva. But in this case of the firstborn, what you can use to redeem a firstborn, where it seemed that he is following the other opinion, that's not because he generally follows Ribuy Mi'ut, generally follows kelal uprat. Only in that example he was using Ribuy and Mi'ut because, if you remember, the words were out of order. It had a generality, tifteh again, and then it said with 5 coins. And that's why he used ribui and mi'ot, as we see in a Braita from the school of Rabbi Ishmael. Kedatana Rabbi Ishmael, Detana Rabbi Ishmael. Bamayim shene pe'amim, en ze kelal uprat, ela riba umi'et. This Braita of Rabbi Ishmael quotes this pasuk here that's talking about the types of kosher fish, and it says, Et ze tochelu mikol asher bamayim. כל אשר לא סנפיר וקסקסת במים, בימים ובנחלים אותם תאכלו. You can eat this, that's in the water. Anything that has fins and scales, in the water. And then it says, in the seas or streams. So you see it has a ribui bamayim, and then another ribui bamayim, but then it specifies only in the seas or streams. So this is a generality, and then a particular. And this Baraita says, when you have an example like this of bamayim twice, and then a particular, that we don't use a klal uprat. Rather, we resort to riba umi'et. And therefore, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi actually is consistent with the methodology of Rabbi Ishmael, that when you have kelal uprat uklal in that order, he's going to follow kelal uprat, the methodology. Only when it's generality, particular, then he's going to follow Ribui and Mi'ut, because Rabbi Ishmael himself in this Baraita, or at least his school, says we follow Ribui and Mi'ut. And therefore, that's why Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, when it came to the redemption of the Bechor, he used Ribui Mi'ut, because it was generality, particular. But in general, otherwise, he uses the Kilal Uprat, and therefore, there is no reason to think that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi would follow Rabbi Akiva. And therefore we have to reject that answer of Rav Kahana that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was giving his own opinion and he happened to agree with Rabbi Ishmael in one case. That, yes, we have a source, but we have no source that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi agreed with Rabbi Akiva in the other case. Okay, so before we go back to answer our Mishnah, we wonder, Rabbanan, the other rabbis in the case of the redemption, who said that you can use other items, that you cannot use avadim and karkaot, Amar Ravina, what about them? Because they used kilal uprat. So how could they use kilal uprat, from which they generalize all things that are similar to money, that they're movable and they're worth, that have intrinsic worth? How could they do ribui mi'ut if here Rabbi Ishmael said that you don't? Amar Ravina kedam Rebbe Ma'arava kol makom sheta moseh shetei kilalot hasmuchot ze lazeh hatel pirat benehem vedunem bechlal ufrat. They have a source from the west, from Eretz Yisrael. In Eretz Yisrael, they have this methodology that says anytime you see 2 kilalot that are next to each other, and then a prat afterwards, you can switch around the order. Take the prat, put it between the 2 kilals, and you can understand it as a kilal uprat uklal. So the Rabbanan are following that methodology, but Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is following the ribui mi'ut only in that case because he's following this baraita from Rabbi Ishmael. But in general, he follows kilal uprat. So back to our question: who is the author of this Mishnah? And the answer is Hashtad Amat Rabbi Kilale Ufrate Darish Bal Korchech Kasha Shevuot. So now that we've come to the conclusion that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi generally follows the methodology of Klal Uprat, so therefore we have a problem with Rabbi Yehuda Nasi being the author of the whole Mishnah, and that in one case he's following Rabbi Ishmael, and in the case of Shevuot he's following Rabbi Akiva and using Ribui and Mi'ut, because he doesn't. Rabbi actually uses Klal Uprat, and therefore in the case of Shevuot, once he applies Klal Uprat, he's going to agree with Rabbi Ishmael that we only include future-oriented vows and not past-oriented vows. So Rabbi Yehuda Nasi himself would not agree with the clause of Shevuot. Rather, it must be that when it comes to Shevuot, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was quoting the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, even though he disagrees with it. In fact, this is an anthology. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, as the editor of the Mishnah, wanted to bring all 4 cases where you have 2 that are 4, and even though he didn't agree halacha l'maaseh with all of them, he agreed with the first one because he agreed with the one about Yediot HaTumah because that is the opinion of Rabbi Ishmael. Yes, he agreed. But in Shevuot, he would agree with Rabbi Ishmael that only for the future, not the past. But nevertheless, he brought all of them in order to have a comprehensive list, and that is a very important point about Rabbi Yehuda Nasi's role in the Mishnah, that at least in some cases, he brings things as an anthology, even though he doesn't necessarily agree with everything, even though he made it stam and didn't say this is only according to Rabbi Akiva. Nevertheless, for stylistic reasons, he might bring things all together, although he agrees with some, but not others. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.